The glass didn't just break. It exploded across white leather like a gunshot in a quiet Texas street. Officer Ryan Keller didn't hesitate. Baton up one swing, and the window of a black Lamborghini shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. And standing right there, just inches away, was Marcus Reed, hands already raised, calm, still, like he'd been expecting it. No yelling, no resistance. Just a man in a navy polo, breathing steady, while a cop treated his car like it didn't belong to him. Around them, neighbors watched. Phones came out, eyes locked in. But no one stepped forward. No one said a word. Because deep down, they'd already decided who this moment was about. Keller leaned in, voice low, sharp, like Marcus had something to prove just by standing there. But Marcus didn't argue, didn't move. His fingers brushed lightly against a small metal piece on his keys. Something that caught the sunlight for just a second, then disappeared again. And Keller? He didn't even notice. Not yet, because in just a few minutes, that same officer who swung that baton so confidently is going to freeze in front of everyone and realize he just made the worst mistake of his career. The street was too quiet for something like this. It was the kind of quiet you only found in certain neighborhoods just outside Dallas. Trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, the faint hum of sprinklers ticking across green grass in perfect arcs. The morning sun hadn't fully burned off the thin layer of haze, and everything carried that soft, golden glow that made even ordinary things feel peaceful. Then the lights hit. Red and blue strobes slice it across the calm like a warning no one had asked for. They reflected off the smooth, matte black surface of a Lamborghini Urus parked at the curb, turning its flawless finish into something fractured and restless. A police cruiser idled behind it, engine low and steady. Another had just pulled up, angled slightly, as if to block any escape that was never going to happen. Because there was no chase. There had never been one. Marcus Reed stood beside his own car, already outside, already complying. His hands were raised, not dramatic, just enough to be seen clearly. His fingers were open, relaxed, steady in a way that didn't match the tension tightening the air around him. He wore a navy polo, clean but worn at the edges, and khaki pants that had seen more than a few long days. Nothing about him looked dangerous. Nothing about him looked like a man trying to run. Across from him, Officer Ryan Keller stepped forward, jaw tight, baton already in his hand. He didn't announce himself, didn't explain anything, didn't even look Marcus in the eye. He just moved. The baton came up in one swift motion, cutting through the quiet like it had somewhere urgent to be. For a split second, the world seemed to pause. The arc of the swing, the way the sunlight caught the metal, the faint reflection of Marcus in the tinted glass. Then it landed. A sharp, cracking impact shattered the morning. The passenger side window exploded inward, not with a dull break, but with a bright, ringing burst that echoed down the street. Glass scattered across the white leather seats in a spray of glittering fragments, catching the light as they fell, turning something beautiful into something ruined in an instant. The sound lingered longer than it should have. Even the sprinklers seemed to hesitate. Marcus didn't flinch. That was the part that didn't fit. His eyes closed for half a second. Not in fear, not in panic. Just a brief pause, like someone absorbing something they had already expected. When he opened them again, his expression hadn't changed. No anger, no confusion. Just a quiet stillness that felt out of place against the chaos unfolding around him. Officer Keller stepped back, breathing slightly heavier now, as if the act itself had demanded something from him. He looked at the shattered window, then at Marcus, like he was waiting for a reaction that wasn't coming. "Hands where I can see them," Keller said, his voice sharp, louder than it needed to be. Marcus's hands hadn't moved. They were still there, visible, open. "I'm right here, officer," Marcus said, his tone calm, almost gentle. "I'm not going anywhere." That seemed to irritate Keller more. Behind him, Officer Lily Chen shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She had stepped out of the passenger side of the cruiser moments earlier, her hand hovering near her belt, her eyes moving between Marcus and the broken window like she was trying to understand how things had escalated this fast. She hadn't said a word. Not yet. A front door opened somewhere down the block, then another. People began to emerge slowly, drawn by the noise. A man in gym shorts stood at the edge of his driveway, phone already in his hand. A woman pulled her child a little closer, whispering something that didn't quite reach the street. Curtains twitched behind windows. Garage doors paused halfway open. The neighborhood was waking up, and it was watching. Marcus became aware of them without turning his head. He could feel the weight of their attention, the quiet curiosity, the unspoken questions forming in their minds. What did he do? Why him? Why that car? The Lamborghini sat there, still gleaming despite the damage, still out of place in a street where most vehicles were practical, predictable. It asked questions just by existing. And now those questions had found an audience. Keller took a step closer, his shadow cutting across the scattered glass. "You think this is a game?" he said, low enough that it almost sounded personal. Marcus shook his head slightly. "No, sir." The word came out easily, not forced, not defensive, just steady. That steadiness hung in the air, and for a moment, it felt like everything might settle, like maybe the situation would correct itself, reset, return to something resembling reason. But Keller's grip tightened on the baton. His eyes flicked to the car again, to the interior now exposed through jagged edges of broken glass. Something in his posture shifted, less controlled, more certain, like he had already decided what this situation was supposed to be. And Marcus saw it. Not the decision itself, but the absence of doubt behind it. That was the part that mattered. He lowered his gaze slightly, not in submission, but in calculation. His right hand moved just a fraction, barely noticeable, toward the side of his body, where his keys hung loosely against his pocket. For a split second, his fingers brushed against the metal, a small object, cold, solid. Then his hand stilled again, returning to where it had been, open and visible. Across the street, the man in gym shorts raised his phone higher. Someone else started recording. Lily noticed that too. Her eyes darted toward the growing number of witnesses, then back to Keller. There was something in her expression now, uncertainty, maybe even discomfort, but it stayed locked behind a wall of silence. Keller didn't seem to care who was watching. He gestured sharply toward the car. "Step away from the vehicle," he ordered. Marcus was already a step away. He took another, slow and deliberate, making sure every movement was visible, predictable. The distance between him and the Lamborghini widened, leaving the shattered window behind like a line that had already been crossed. Glass crunched softly under Keller's boots as he moved toward the passenger side, peering in through the broken opening. Marcus stood still, hands up, breathing even. The neighborhood held its breath with him, because something about this didn't make sense. Not the stop, not the force, not the man standing calmly beside a broken luxury car that belonged to him. And as the silence stretched, one question began to settle over everyone watching. Quiet, uneasy, impossible to ignore. If he had done everything right, why had that window just been smashed? The question didn't just sit in the air. It settled into people. Across the street, a garage door stopped halfway up. A man in a faded cowboy's t-shirt stood frozen beneath it, one hand still gripping the remote, his eyes fixed on the scene like he was trying to make sense of something that refused to line up. Because Marcus Reed didn't look like trouble. He never had. Every morning at exactly 7:12, his front door opened. Same routine, same quiet rhythm. He'd step out with a coffee mug in one hand, keys in the other, and call out softly to his daughter, "Come on, Maya, we're going to be late." Maya, 8 years old, braids always slightly uneven because he did them himself, would come running out with her backpack bouncing behind her. And every morning, without fail, Marcus would kneel down right there on the driveway, adjust her straps, smooth down the top of her hair, and ask, "You ready?" That was the version of Marcus the neighborhood knew. The man who waved even when people didn't wave back. The man who helped Mrs. Alvarez change her tire in the heat of July and refused the $20 bill she tried to press into his hand. The man who spent a full Saturday afternoon fixing a loose fence panel for the Johnsons next door, even though they'd barely spoken more than 3 sentences to him in the 3 years he'd lived there. He didn't make noise, didn't throw parties, didn't give anyone a reason to look twice. Except for one thing, the car. That Lamborghini didn't belong on Briar Creek Lane. Not in a place where people drove practical, predictable vehicles. Silver SUVs, white sedans, maybe the occasional pickup with a clean bed and a dealership sticker still on the back window. The Lamborghini asked a question every time it pulled into the driveway, and Marcus always gave the same answer. Consulting. That was it. Not finance, not tech, not government contracts, just consulting. It was the kind of word that sounded important without being interesting. The kind of word that made people nod and move on instead of asking follow-up questions. And Marcus counted on that. Because the truth was, he had spent most of his life learning how to disappear in plain sight. It started long before Plano, back when he was a kid in South Chicago, where silence wasn't just a personality trait. It was protection. He remembered standing on the corner outside a corner store, watching his father get pulled aside by 2 officers who spoke to him like he didn't belong in his own skin. No shouting, no hitting. Just that quiet, steady pressure of being questioned like your existence needed explaining. Marcus had been 10 years old enough to understand, old enough to notice how his father kept his hands visible, his voice even, his movements slow, old enough to realize that doing everything right didn't always mean you'd be treated right. That lesson stayed with him, followed him through every job, every move, every new beginning. It shaped the way he spoke, the way he walked, the way he chose when to say something, and when to let silence do the work. By the time he arrived in Plano, he had refined it into something almost invisible. He blended, adapted, adjusted. He became the man nobody questioned, until the car showed up. The first week he brought it home, Mrs. Alvarez had leaned over her hedge, squinting at the matte black finish like it might explain itself if she stared long enough. "That yours?" she'd asked. Marcus smiled, easy and relaxed. "Yes, ma'am." She paused just for a second. "Well, it's very nice." "Thank you." And that was it. No follow-up, no deeper curiosity. Because even when people wondered, they didn't push. Not really. But wondering had a way of building quietly over time. It lived in glances, in half-finished conversations, in the way people's eyes lingered just a little too long when he drove past. And now, on this quiet street with flashing lights painting everything in harsh color, that quiet wondering had turned into something else. Something louder. Something sharper. Officer Keller stood by the broken window, looking into the car like he expected the inside to confirm whatever story he had already decided was true. Marcus stood a few feet away, hands still raised, breathing steady. He could feel every eye on him, feel the weight of judgment forming in real time. Not from everyone, but from enough. From the man recording on his phone, from the woman whispering to her child, from the people who didn't know him well enough to trust him over the uniform standing in front of him. And Marcus understood that. He didn't like it, but he understood it, because he had spent his whole life watching how quickly perception could turn into assumption, and how assumption could turn into action. His fingers twitched slightly, almost unconsciously. The small metal keychain hanging from his keys caught the light for just a moment, just enough to flash a dull silver glint before disappearing again against the fabric of his pocket. No one seemed to notice, except maybe Lily. She had shifted her stance again, her gaze flicking from Marcus to Keller and back, like she was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away from her. Because something about this didn't feel right. Not the man, not the car, not the way Keller had skipped every step that was supposed to come before force. But she didn't say anything. Not yet. Keller straightened up, turning away from the shattered window with a look that wasn't satisfaction. It was something closer to certainty, like he had just confirmed what he'd already believed. He glanced at Marcus again, slower this time, his eyes moving over him from head to toe, taking inventory, judging, deciding. "What do you do again?" Keller asked, his tone flat, almost casual. Marcus met his gaze, calm as ever. "I told you, sir. I'm in consulting." Keller let out a short breath through his nose. "Yeah," he said, "that's what I thought." The words didn't sound like agreement. They sounded like disbelief. And something underneath that, something unspoken but heavy enough to be felt, hung in the space between them. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to, because he already knew where this was going. The only question left was how far it would go, and whether anyone standing there, watching, would step in before it did. Nobody did. Not the man with the phone still recording, thumb hovering like he might stop any second, but never did. Not the woman across the street who had now stepped fully onto her lawn, arms crossed tightly against her chest. Not even Lily. Especially not Lily. Because stepping in wasn't something you just did. Not when you were 5 months into the job. Not when every training day had drilled one message into your head. Back your partner. Ask questions later. Not when the man you were supposed to trust was already moving like he'd made up his mind. Keller circled the Lamborghini again, slower this time. His fingers dragged lightly along the edge of the doorframe, tracing the clean line of the car like he was inspecting something that didn't belong where it was. The shattered glass crunched under his boots, sharp and deliberate with every step. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Marcus watched him without turning his head, just his eyes, tracking the movement, measuring it. There was something about the way Keller moved now, less reactive, more intentional, like the moment of impact had already passed, and everything after this was just filling in the blanks. "You live around here?" Keller asked suddenly. The question hung there, almost casual, like it didn't matter. But it did. Marcus nodded slightly. "Yes, sir." "Where?" Marcus glanced briefly down the street. 2 houses down. Blue mailbox." Keller followed his gaze for the second, then looked back at him. "Uh-huh." That was all he said, but it carried something heavier than the word itself. Doubt. Dismissal. Like the idea didn't quite settle right in his head. Lily felt it too. She shifted her weight again, her fingers brushing the edge of her vest. She glanced down the street toward the house Marcus had pointed out. It looked like every other house on the block. Neat, quiet, ordinary. Nothing about it suggested anything unusual. Nothing about Marcus did either. And yet here they were. Keller stopped at the front of the vehicle, resting one hand on the hood. He leaned slightly, peering through the windshield, eyes narrowing as he scanned the interior. "What's in the car?" he asked. Marcus didn't move. "Just personal items," he said. "Nothing dangerous." Keller tilted his head, like he was considering that answer, weighing it against something only he could see. "Pop the door," he said. Marcus's eyes shifted just slightly. "I'd prefer not to," he replied, calm but firm. "There's no reason for a search." The shift in the air was immediate. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was there, the first real line. Keller straightened slowly. "Prefer?" he repeated, like the word didn't belong in the same sentence as a command. Marcus held his ground, not physically, but in tone. "I've complied with everything you've asked, officer," he said. "If there's a reason for a search, I'd like to understand it." That was the moment, the one Lily would remember later, because it wasn't aggressive, it wasn't disrespectful, it wasn't even confrontational. It was just a question, a reasonable one, and somehow that made it worse. Keller's expression tightened, something flickering behind his eyes, something sharper now. "You got something to hide?" he asked. Marcus shook his head once. "No, sir." "Then open the door." "I'm not refusing to cooperate," Marcus said carefully. "I'm just asking for a reason." There it was again. That calm, that control, that refusal to escalate. And for a second, just a second, it looked like Keller might step back, might reconsider, might shift this into something normal. But instead, he laughed. Not loud, not friendly, just a short, dry sound that didn't carry any humor. "Man," he muttered, almost to himself. "Y'all always got a reason." Lily's stomach tightened. That word, y'all. It landed heavier than anything else so far. Keller stepped closer again, closing the distance between him and Marcus by just enough to make it feel intentional. "You think I don't know what this is?" he said quietly. Marcus didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because whatever Keller thought this was, he had already decided it long before the stop. The radio on Keller's shoulder crackled softly, but he ignored it. Instead, he turned slightly, nodding toward the car. "Step back another foot," he said. Marcus did, slow, measured, exactly as instructed. His heel touched the edge of the curb. He stopped there. Keller moved to the passenger side again, peering through the broken window. The jagged edges of glass framed the interior like something torn open, something exposed. Inside, the white leather seats were dusted with glittering fragments. And on the passenger seat, partially covered in glass, sat a plain yellow envelope. Nothing special, no markings, no labels. Just there. Keller's eyes locked onto it. He leaned in slightly, trying to see more without reaching. "What's that?" he asked, pointing. Marcus followed his gaze. "Documents," he said. "What kind of documents?" "Personal." Keller let out another breath through his nose. "Everything's personal until it ain't," he muttered. Behind him, Lily took a step forward before she could stop herself. "Maybe we should," she started. Keller didn't turn, didn't look at her, but his voice cut her off anyway. "I got it," 2 words, flat, final. Lily stopped. The moment passed. And just like that, the line that could have been drawn wasn't. Keller straightened again, stepping back from the window. He looked at Marcus, then at the envelope, then back at Marcus. Something had clicked. Not proof, not evidence, just a decision. And once that decision was made, everything else seemed to fall into place around it. "Stay right there," Keller said. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak, didn't break that steady rhythm he'd held since the beginning. But inside, something shifted. Not fear, not anger, something quieter, something colder. Because now he understood. This was never about speed, never about safety, never about a routine stop. This was about a story someone had already written, and the only role Marcus had been given was the one Keller believed he fit. Across the street, the man with the phone zoomed in slightly, trying to capture the details, the broken glass, the officer, the man standing still, the envelope on the seat. He didn't know what he was looking at yet, but something about it felt important. And Marcus knew it too, because as he stood there, hands still visible, heart steady, eyes forward, he realized something else. This wasn't just about how far it would go. It was about what would happen when it went too far. Marcus felt that line before anyone else did, not because he was braver, not because he was stronger, but because he had been here before, just in different shapes, different streets, different uniforms. He stood with his hands still raised, palms open, the warm Texas air brushing against his skin. But his mind had already stepped somewhere else. South Chicago. A narrow street where the sidewalks cracked like old glass, where sirens were just another background noise you stopped noticing after a while. He was 10 again, standing half a block away from his father, watching 2 officers circle him like he had done something wrong simply by being there. His father hadn't raised his voice, hadn't argued, hadn't even looked angry. He had just stood there, hands visible, answering every question slowly, carefully. And later, when they got home, Marcus had asked him why. "Why didn't you say something?" His father had looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "Because sometimes, son, surviving the moment matters more than winning it." That sentence had never left him. It sat with him now, on this clean suburban street that looked nothing like where he grew up, but felt exactly the same in all the ways that counted. Marcus lowered his eyes slightly, not down to the ground, not away in fear, just enough to break the direct line of challenge that Keller seemed to be searching for. It wasn't submission, it was control. He shifted his weight just a fraction, slow enough to be seen, predictable enough not to trigger anything. "I'm right here," he said again, his voice even, steady as a calm surface over deep water. "I'm not going anywhere." Keller didn't answer. He was still staring at the yellow envelope inside the car, like it had confirmed something he couldn't quite explain out loud. Behind him, Lily exhaled softly, though she didn't realize she had been holding her breath. She watched Marcus carefully now, not just as a subject of the stop, but as a person. There was something about him that didn't match the tension Keller was building. No sudden movements, no defensive posture, no anger rising to meet aggression, just composure. And it unsettled her, because it forced a question she hadn't been ready to ask yet. If he's not reacting, then what is he thinking? Marcus could feel Keller's attention shift back to him again, that heavy, measuring look. "You know," Keller said slowly, stepping closer, "most people get real nervous by now." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He let the silence sit for a second, then said, "I'm cooperating, officer." Keller tilted his head, studying him like a problem he hadn't solved yet. "Yeah," he said, "you are." But the way he said it made it sound like a problem, like cooperation itself was suspicious. Across the street, a second phone came up. Now there were two people recording. The sound of a passing car slowed as the driver craned their neck, trying to take in what was happening without stopping completely. The neighborhood wasn't just watching anymore, it was gathering. Marcus became aware of that too, not by turning his head, but by listening. The faint murmur of voices, the quiet shuffle of feet, the soft electronic buzz of phones adjusting focus. He had seen this before as well. The audience, the part where something personal becomes something public, where a moment stops belonging to the people in it and starts belonging to everyone watching. And still, no one stepped forward. No one said, "That's enough." No one asked, "Why?" Even Lily stayed where she was. Her hand hovered near her radio now, but she didn't touch it, didn't speak, didn't move. Because moving meant choosing, and she wasn't ready for that yet. Keller stepped closer again, now just a few feet from Marcus, close enough that his voice didn't need to be loud anymore, close enough that the space between them felt tight, controlled, deliberate. "You got ID on you?" Keller asked. "Yes, sir." "Reach for it." Marcus nodded once. "Going into my back pocket," he said, clear and calm. He moved slowly. Everything about the motion was deliberate. His elbow bending just enough. His fingers sliding back, pulling out his wallet without rushing. He brought it forward, holding it out in front of him, making sure Keller could see every step. Keller took it without a word, flipped it open, looked at the name, then looked at Marcus again. "Marcus Reed," he read aloud, like testing how it sounded. Marcus said nothing. Keller scanned the rest of the ID, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Address says you live right here," he said. "Yes, sir." Keller looked down the street again, then back at Marcus. "Long time?" "About 3 years." Another pause, another calculation happening behind Keller's eyes. And then, quietly, almost like he couldn't help himself, "Don't see many like you around here." The sentence trailed just enough to leave space for what he didn't say. But it didn't need finishing. Everyone heard it anyway. Lily's jaw tightened. The man across the street shifted uncomfortably, lowering his phone just a fraction before raising it again. Marcus felt it land, felt the weight of it, but he didn't react, not outwardly. Inside, though, something old stirred. Not anger, not exactly. Something deeper, a recognition. The same quiet judgment dressed up in different words. The same line drawn without being spoken. He inhaled slowly, then exhaled. "People don't always look like what you expect," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle. Keller's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yeah," he said, "that's one way to put it." He snapped the wallet shut and handed it back. Marcus took it carefully, returning it to his pocket with the same controlled motion as before. No sudden moves, no mistakes, because he knew exactly what mistakes could cost. Keller turned away again, pacing once along the side of the car, then stopping. His gaze went back to the broken window, to the envelope, to the interior that now felt exposed. And then something shifted. Not in Marcus, not in Lily, but in Keller. Because whatever doubt had been there before was gone now, replaced by something firmer, something decided. And when he spoke again, his voice carried that decision with it. "Step back another 2 feet," he said. Marcus did, without hesitation, without question, but as he moved, his fingers brushed once more against the keys at his side. The small metal piece attached to them caught the sunlight again. A brief flash, gone in an instant. Still unnoticed. Or at least, not yet. Marcus settled into place, hands still visible, posture still calm. But inside, that quiet shift had already happened. Because he could feel it now, the moment tipping, the line being crossed. And he understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't going to resolve itself. Not through reason, not through compliance, not through patience alone. Something else was coming. Something bigger than this street, bigger than this moment. And when it arrived, everything here was going to look different. But for now, nothing changed. Not really. The sun still hung low, warming the pavement. The sprinklers still ticked in the distance. Somewhere a dog barked once and then went quiet again. Life kept moving, except for this one pocket of space where everything had slowed down. Marcus stood exactly where he had been told, 2 feet back from the curb now, hands still visible, shoulders relaxed in a way that looked almost unnatural given what had just happened. Glass still clung to the edges of the shattered window behind him, catching light in sharp, uneven lines. A few pieces slid down slowly, tapping softly against the door before falling to the ground. The sound was small, but in the silence around them, it felt louder than it should. Keller turned his back on Marcus again, focusing on the car like it was the only thing that mattered. He leaned slightly, peering through the broken opening, eyes locked on that yellow envelope. Behind him, the street had changed. There were more people now. Not a crowd, not in the way you'd see in a city, but enough. A man with a baseball cap stood at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed, shifting his weight like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. A teenage boy sat on the curb, elbows on his knees, watching with wide eyes and a phone resting loosely in his hand. 2 women stood together near a mailbox, whispering quietly, and every single one of them was looking at Marcus. Not Keller. Marcus. The man standing still. The man not fighting back. The man who didn't fit whatever story was playing out in front of them. Lily noticed that. She noticed everything. The way the cameras were pointed. The way people leaned forward just a little more when Keller raised his voice. The way no one stepped in, even when it felt like they should. Her throat felt tight, because she could feel the shift happening, not just in the situation, but in how it was being seen. And she didn't know what to do with that. Keller reached one hand through the broken window again, careful this time, pushing aside a few pieces of glass as he leaned in deeper. "You always keep your stuff like this?" he asked without turning around. Marcus answered without hesitation. "It's just an envelope, sir." "Yeah," Keller muttered. "That's what it looks like." He tapped the side of the car with his knuckles, a dull sound against the metal. Then he turned back, walking slowly toward Marcus again. "You got anything illegal in there?" he asked. "No, sir." "No weapons?" "No, sir." "No drugs?" Marcus shook his head. "No, sir." Each answer came the same way. Calm, even, unshaken. And somehow that steadiness seemed to irritate Keller more with every word. "Man," Keller said under his breath, shaking his head slightly. "You're real comfortable, aren't you?" Marcus didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because the question wasn't really a question. It was an accusation. Keller stopped a few feet away, studying him again. "You know what it looks like?" he said. Marcus kept his eyes forward. "No, sir." "It looks like someone who thinks they're smarter than the situation they're in." The words hung there, sharp, deliberate. The teenage boy on the curb leaned forward a little more, his phone now raised again, recording steadily. The man in the baseball cap exhaled loudly through his nose, shaking his head once, but still didn't move, still didn't speak. Lily felt something tighten in her chest, because she knew this part, not from experience, but from training, from all the moments they warned you about without ever really explaining. The moment where the officer decides what the situation is, and everything else just follows. Keller took another step closer, close enough now that Marcus could feel his presence, the weight of it, the expectation behind it. "You're standing there like you belong here," Keller said quietly. Marcus blinked once, slow, measured. "I do belong here," he said. There was no defiance in his voice, no challenge, just truth. And that made it worse. Keller's jaw tightened. "You sure about that?" he asked. Marcus didn't answer, because answering wouldn't change anything. Not this part. Across the street, one of the women lowered her voice even more, whispering something that made the other glance quickly toward Marcus before looking away again. The air felt heavier now, thicker, like something had settled over the entire street, pressing everything down just enough to make breathing feel different. Lily took a small step forward again. Just one. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Because Keller hadn't asked for her input. Because no one else had spoken. Because breaking that silence felt bigger than just saying words. And so she stayed quiet, just like everyone else. Marcus felt that too. The silence. Not empty, not neutral, active, choosing. And he understood it. Because silence was something he had lived with his whole life. Silence from people who didn't want trouble. Silence from people who weren't sure what they were seeing. Silence from people who told themselves it wasn't their place. He didn't blame them. But he didn't expect anything from them either. Keller stepped back suddenly, turning away again, pacing once along the side of the car. His movements were sharper now, less controlled, like something inside him had shifted from curiosity to certainty. He stopped near the front of the vehicle, looking at the damage again, at the glass, at the interior, at the envelope. Then he looked back at Marcus, and for the first time, there was no hesitation at all. "Stay right there," Keller said. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink, because he already knew whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be smaller, it was going to be bigger. And as Keller turned once more toward the broken window, reaching in deeper this time, the crowd leaned in with him, watching, waiting, still saying nothing, still doing nothing. As the moment tipped further than it should have ever gone, Keller's arm slid deeper through the broken window. Glass shifted under his sleeve, a faint grinding sound against leather and metal. He didn't flinch, didn't slow. His fingers brushed past scattered fragments, pushing them aside as if they were nothing more than dust. The yellow envelope sat there, slightly bent now, one corner tucked under the crease of the seat. Keller stared at it for a second longer than necessary. Then he pulled back. Not with the envelope, not yet. He straightened slowly, turning toward Marcus again. Something had changed in his face. Not anger, not frustration. Something colder. "You got an attitude," Keller said quietly. Marcus blinked once, steady. "No, sir." Keller tilted his head. "Yeah, you do," he continued, stepping closer. "Standing there like you're above this." Marcus didn't move, didn't react. But inside, something tightened. Not fear, recognition, because this was the part where the words stopped being about actions. and started being about identity. "I'm cooperating," Marcus said, his voice even. "That's all I'm doing." Keller let out a short breath. "Cooperating," he repeated, like the word tasted wrong. "You think this is about cooperation?" Marcus said nothing. The silence stretched again, thicker this time. Across the street, the teenage boy lowered his phone for just a second, glancing at the adults around him like he was waiting for someone, anyone, to step in. No one did. Lily felt it too, that pressure, that invisible line everyone could see but no one wanted to cross. She shifted again, this time taking half a step forward. "Maybe we should," she started, softer than before. Keller's head snapped slightly in her direction. "I said I got it," he cut in. Not loud, but sharp enough to end the sentence. Lily froze. The words didn't just stop her. They placed her, back where she was supposed to be, behind him, watching, learning, silent. Marcus noticed that. Not directly, but in the way the air shifted again, in the way the only voice left was Keller's, and that made everything clearer. Keller turned back to Marcus, closing the space again, just enough to feel intentional. "You know what the problem is?" he said. Marcus didn't answer. "You think because you're calm, because you're polite, because you got this," he gestured vaguely toward the car, "that you control what's happening here." Marcus met his eyes now. Not aggressive, not challenging, just present. "I don't control anything, officer," he said. "I'm just standing here." Keller leaned in slightly. "Yeah," he said. "That's the problem." The words landed heavier than anything before them, because they weren't about behavior anymore. They were about perception, about who was allowed to stand where and how. Marcus felt the weight of it settle into his chest. Familiar, too familiar. But his breathing stayed even, his hands stayed visible, and slowly, almost without thinking, his right thumb brushed again against the keys at his side. The small metal piece caught the sunlight, a brief, dull glint. Gone again. Keller didn't notice, but Lily did. Her eyes flicked down for just a second. Something about it stuck in her mind. Not enough to understand, just enough to register. Keller stepped back suddenly, turning away again like he had made up his mind about something. He paced once, twice, then stopped. His gaze went back to the broken window, to the envelope, and then, without warning, he moved. Fast. He stepped to the passenger side, leaned in through the shattered opening, and grabbed the envelope. Glass shifted again, sliding across leather as his hand closed around it. Marcus's eyes followed the motion. For the first time since the stop began, something changed in his expression. Not panic, not fear, something sharper, more focused. "Sir," Marcus said, calm but firm, "that's personal property." Keller pulled the envelope out and held it up slightly, turning it in his hand. "Yeah," he said. "We'll see about that." Marcus took a small step forward before catching himself. Not rushing, not reacting, just adjusting. "Officer," he said, his voice still steady, but different now. "There's no reason to go through that." Keller ignored him. He tapped the edge of the envelope against his palm, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're real concerned about this," he said. Marcus didn't answer immediately, because answering wrong mattered. "It's private," he said finally. Keller let out a quiet laugh. "Everything's private until it isn't," he said again. The same line, but now it carried more weight, because now he was holding something that didn't belong to him, and he knew it. even if he didn't know what it was. Lily stepped forward again, this time more deliberately. "Officer Keller," she said, her voice careful. "We should probably log—" "Later," Keller cut in. He didn't even look at her. His attention stayed locked on the envelope. On Marcus. On whatever story he had already decided this moment was supposed to tell. The crowd shifted slightly. Not closer, not farther. Just adjusting. Watching. Waiting. Still silent. Marcus stood there, hands still visible. But something inside him had fully shifted now. Not outwardly. You couldn't see it in his posture. Couldn't hear it in his voice. But it was there. The waiting had changed. Before it had been patience, now it was something else. Something deliberate. Something timed. Keller looked up from the envelope again. "And don't you forget," he said, his voice dropping lower, harder. "You're not in charge here." Marcus met his gaze, for just a second longer than before. And when he spoke, his voice was still calm, still controlled. But there was something new underneath it, something that hadn't been there before. "I haven't forgotten anything," he said. The words were simple, but they landed differently. Keller paused, just for a second. Then he shook it off. "Yeah," he muttered. "We'll see." He turned away again, envelope still in hand, pacing toward the cruiser. Lily watched him go, then looked back at Marcus. And for the first time since this started, she wasn't just uncertain, she was uneasy, because something about the way Marcus stood there, not angry, not afraid, not even surprised, didn't match anything she had been trained to expect. It looked less like someone caught in a situation, and more like someone who already knew how it was going to end. And that thought stayed with her, as Keller reached the cruiser, as he opened the door, as he prepared to go further than he ever should have. Because whatever line had just been crossed, it wasn't just about authority anymore. It was about something that couldn't be undone. And none of them, not Keller, not Lily, not the people watching, had any idea what they had just stepped into. Keller didn't see it. Not in the envelope, not in Marcus, not in the way the entire moment had shifted without making a sound. He only saw what he wanted to see. Control. And once he felt that, he leaned into it. The cruiser door opened with a hollow click. Keller slid into the driver's seat, the yellow envelope still in his hand. He didn't close the door all the way, just enough to lean forward, resting his elbows on the steering wheel as he flipped the envelope over. Outside, Marcus stood exactly where he had been left, hands visible, back straight, eyes forward. But now, watching, not reacting, watching. The wind picked up just enough to move a few loose shards of glass along the pavement. They scraped softly, like a quiet warning no one understood. Across the street, the teenage boy shifted again, lowering his phone for a second. "Man," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. "This ain't right." But he didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't say it louder, because saying it louder would make it real, and real meant responsibility. So he lifted the phone again and kept recording. Inside the cruiser, Keller slid his thumb under the flap of the envelope. There was a moment, just one, where he could have stopped, where he could have handed it back, where he could have turned this into something that didn't follow him the rest of his life. But that moment passed, and he opened it. Papers shifted inside. Thick, official, not the kind you picked up at an office supply store. He pulled out the first page, glancing down at it quickly, not reading, just scanning. His brow tightened slightly. Not confusion. Not yet. Just something unfamiliar. He flipped to the next page, then another. The sound of paper moving was louder than it should have been. Outside, Lily took a step closer to the cruiser. Not enough to intervene, just enough to see. Her eyes caught the edge of the document as Keller turned it. Text, structured, formal, not random, not messy, not personal in the way people usually meant. This looked different. Officer Keller, she said carefully, her voice low. We should log anything we remove from the vehicle. Keller didn't look up. I said later. His tone hadn't changed, but something in his posture had. A stiffness, a focus, like he was trying to make sense of something that didn't immediately line up with what he expected. He flipped another page, then stopped. Just for a second. It was small, barely noticeable, but Lily saw it. His hand paused, then moved again. He closed the folder halfway, tapping it lightly against his palm like he needed to reset something in his head. Outside, Marcus watched all of it. Every movement, every hesitation. And for the first time since this began, there was no question left in his mind. The line had been crossed. Not stepped on, not brushed against. Crossed. And once you crossed that line, there was no walking it back. Keller stepped out of the cruiser, the envelope now tucked loosely under his arm. He walked back toward Marcus, slower this time, more measured, but not calmer. No. Something underneath had shifted, something he couldn't quite place. You didn't mention paperwork, Keller said, holding up the envelope slightly. Marcus's gaze followed it, then returned to Keller. You didn't ask, he replied. The answer was simple, too simple, and it hit something in Keller that he didn't like. You think you're clever? Keller asked. Marcus shook his head once. No, sir. Because this... Keller tapped the envelope again. This doesn't look like nothing. It isn't nothing, Marcus said. There was a pause, a longer one this time. The air felt tighter. Even the people watching seemed to lean in without realizing it. What is it then? Keller asked. Marcus met his eyes, and for the first time, there was something there. Not defiance, not fear, something quieter, something that carried weight. It's not something you should be holding, Marcus said. The words landed, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy. Keller's expression shifted again. That flicker from before, uncertainty, came back for just a second, then disappeared, replaced by something stronger, something defensive. Yeah, Keller said. And why's that? Marcus didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't for this moment. Not yet. Instead, he said, because you've already gone far enough. That did it. The last thread of restraint snapped. Keller stepped closer again, the envelope now clenched tighter in his hand. You don't tell me what's far enough, he said, his voice low, controlled, but edged with something sharp. Marcus didn't move, didn't step back, didn't raise his voice. I'm not telling you anything, he said. I'm just standing here. The same line, the same calm. And somehow that calm now felt like pressure, like it was pushing back without moving. Keller exhaled sharply, turning away again, pacing once more. The crowd shifted. Someone coughed. A car slowed at the end of the block, then kept going. Everything felt suspended, like the moment was stretching past where it should have ended. Lily looked from Keller to Marcus and back again. Her pulse felt louder in her ears now, because something about this wasn't just wrong anymore. It was dangerous, not in the physical sense, not yet, but in the way things were stacking, in the way decisions were being made without understanding what they meant. She glanced down again, at Marcus's hands, at the keys. That small metal piece caught the light once more, and this time, she noticed the detail. Not clearly, not enough to understand, but enough to feel like it mattered. She looked back up quickly. "Keller," she said, a little firmer now, "we should slow this down." He didn't answer, didn't even look at her, because in his mind, there was nothing to slow down, only something to prove, and he was already too far into it to stop. Marcus saw that too, and he knew. This wasn't about the stop anymore. It wasn't about the car. It wasn't even about him. It was about a decision that had already been made, and a path that was now locked in place. And the only thing left was for it to play out, no matter where it led, no matter how far it went, because now there was no undoing what had just been done. Keller didn't say anything else. Not right away. He turned from Marcus, walked back toward the cruiser, and slid the envelope onto the front seat like it was just another piece of evidence. Like it belonged there. Like this was normal. It wasn't. But no one said that out loud. "Sit tight," Keller muttered, not even looking at Marcus as he opened the back door of the cruiser. It wasn't a request. Marcus stepped forward slowly, every movement deliberate, measured. He lowered himself into the back seat without resistance, his hands still visible, his posture unchanged. The door shut with a hollow thud, and just like that, he was inside, not arrested, not handcuffed, just contained. The metal mesh partition in front of him cast thin shadows across his face as the morning light shifted. The interior smelled faintly of vinyl and old coffee, something stale lingering in the air like a memory that hadn't quite left. Marcus sat still, hands resting lightly in his lap now, eyes forward. Outside, the world continued without him. Keller leaned against the hood of the cruiser, talking to one of the other officers who had just arrived. Their voices were low, casual, too casual. Like this wasn't anything unusual, like this happened all the time. Lily stood a few feet away, arms folded loosely, but her attention never left the car. More specifically, never left Marcus. She watched him through the glass, waiting for something, anything, a sign of anger, frustration, fear. But there was nothing. He didn't fidget, didn't shift, didn't even glance around. He just sat there, like a man waiting. And that was what unsettled her the most, because people didn't wait like that, unless they knew something. Across the street, the small gathering had grown slightly, not larger in number, but heavier in presence. More phones, more eyes, more silence. A woman whispered, "They got him in the car now," like that explained everything. The teenage boy shook his head slowly, still recording. "They ain't even cuff him," he muttered. "Nope," the man in the baseball cap replied quietly. "Just holding him." Holding him. The words echoed in the air, vague and incomplete. Holding him for what? For how long? No one asked. No one stepped forward, because the moment had already gone too far for that. Inside the cruiser, Marcus blinked once, slow, then again. He shifted his hands slightly, just enough to adjust his posture, and for a brief second, his fingers brushed against the small metal piece clipped to his keys. Still there, still steady, still silent. His breathing remained even, but his eyes weren't empty. They were focused, counting, not seconds, not minutes, something else, something internal. Outside, Keller checked his watch. then glanced toward the cruiser. "Give it a minute," he said to the other officer, shrugging like time itself was part of the process. A minute stretched, then another. 5 passed, then 10. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the haze. The golden softness of the morning sharpened into something brighter, harsher. Still, Marcus didn't move, didn't speak, didn't ask a single question. Lily finally took a step closer to the cruiser. She stood just off to the side, not directly in front, not drawing attention to herself. She leaned slightly, just enough to catch a clearer view through the glass. Marcus's reflection stared back at her. Calm, unbothered, and that was wrong. Everything about this situation should have produced something else, something louder, something reactive. She tapped lightly on the edge of the doorframe. Not loud enough for Keller to hear. Just enough. Marcus turned his head slightly. Their eyes met for the first time since the stop began. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not words, not exactly, understanding, or maybe just recognition. Lily swallowed. "You okay?" she asked quietly. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't even necessary. But it slipped out anyway. Marcus held her gaze for a second, then nodded once. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. Lily hesitated. "You don't want to call anyone?" she asked. A small pause. Then Marcus shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm good." That answer stayed with her, because it didn't make sense. Not for someone in this situation. Not for someone who had just had their property damaged, been detained without explanation, surrounded by officers who weren't exactly treating him fairly. Most people would ask for a lawyer, for a phone call, for something. But Marcus didn't. He just sat there, waiting. Lily stepped back slowly, her thoughts shifting, rearranging. Something about this wasn't adding up. Not just Keller, not just the stop, Marcus, the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, the way he didn't react. It didn't match the story she had been trained to expect. Behind her, Keller laughed at something the other officer said, the sound cutting through the tension like it didn't belong there. Lily turned slightly, watching him, then back at the cruiser, back at Marcus, and that unease in her chest grew heavier, because she realized something she couldn't shake. This didn't feel like someone caught in the situation. It felt like someone waiting for it to unfold. Inside the cruiser, Marcus closed his eyes for a brief second. Just one, then opened them again. Still steady, still calm, but now certain, because whatever was coming next, it was already on its way. Marcus didn't need to check the time. He didn't need to look at a phone or ask a question or shift in his seat. He felt it. The way you feel a storm before the first drop hits. Inside the cruiser, the air felt still. Too still. The kind of quiet that presses in on you, not with fear, but with anticipation. The faint hum of the engine vibrated through the seat beneath him, steady, predictable. Outside, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Keller leaned against the front of the cruiser now, arms crossed, talking to another officer who had arrived minutes earlier. Their conversation was low, casual, like they were discussing something routine, because to them, it was. A stop, a check, a moment that would pass without consequence. That was the assumption. That was always the assumption. Lily stood off to the side, no longer pretending to scan the area. Her attention had narrowed, focused entirely on the cruiser. On Marcus, she couldn't explain it. Not yet. But something inside her kept pulling her back to that same thought. He's not reacting because he doesn't need to. Her eyes shifted again, down, briefly, to the keys, that small metal piece attached to them. It caught the light again. Not bright, not flashy, just there. But this time she saw more than before. A shape, a structure. Not just a decorative tag or a simple keychain. Something official. Her brow tightened slightly. She took a small step closer, squinting just enough to try to make it out. But Marcus's hand shifted, covering it again without seeming to. Not hiding it. Just resting, like it had always been there. Lily stepped back. Her pulse picked up, because now the unease wasn't vague anymore. It had direction. Across the street, the man in the baseball cap lowered his arms, rubbing the back of his neck as he spoke quietly to someone beside him. "This ain't sitting right," he said. The woman next to him nodded, eyes still locked on the scene. "But nobody's saying nothing," she replied. That was the truth of it. Everyone felt it. No one moved. Inside the cruiser, Marcus exhaled slowly. His gaze shifted for the first time. Not outward, not toward Keller, not toward the crowd, but downward, to his hands, to the keys, to the small metal piece resting against his fingers. He adjusted it slightly. Not enough to draw attention, just enough, and then he let his hand settle again. Still. Steady. Outside, Keller pushed off the cruiser, straightening his posture. He walked around to the driver's side, opened the door, and leaned in. The envelope was still there, waiting. He picked it up again, this time slower, more deliberate. He flipped it open once more, pulling out the stack of papers inside. Lily watched from a distance, her focus sharpening, because something about the way he moved had changed. Less confident, more careful. He scanned the top page again, then the second. His brow tightened. Not dramatically, just enough. A flicker. Then he flipped to the third page and paused. Longer this time. Lily saw it. The hesitation, the break in rhythm. She took another step forward without realizing it. "Keller?" she called, her voice carrying just enough to reach him. He didn't respond immediately. His eyes were still on the page. Then he shook his head slightly, like clearing a thought. "Just paperwork," he said, louder now, more certain. Nothing special. But the certainty sounded forced, thin, like it had been placed over something else, something he didn't want to acknowledge. He closed the envelope again, tapping it against his hand. Outside, the radio on his shoulder crackled, a burst of static, then a voice. "All units, stand by." The words cut through the air. Not loud, but unmistakable. Keller froze for just a second, then reached for the radio. "Repeat that," he said. Static again. Then clearer this time. "All units in the Plano sector, hold position. Do not proceed with current stops until further notice." Keller's grip tightened slightly on the envelope. He looked around. At the other officers, at the street, at nothing in particular. "What's that about?" one of the officers asked. Keller didn't answer, because he didn't know. Inside the cruiser, Marcus lifted his eyes again, just slightly, just enough to catch the shift, the change in Keller's posture, the tension, the uncertainty. It was subtle, but it was there. And for the first time since the stop began, the balance moved. Just a fraction. Lily felt it too. Her gaze snapped back to Marcus, then to Keller, then back again. The pieces didn't fully connect yet, but they were moving, rearranging, and something inside her clicked into place. Not as a conclusion, but as a realization. This wasn't random. This wasn't just a stop that went too far. This was something else. Something bigger. Keller stepped away from the cruiser, scanning the street again like he was seeing it differently now. The crowd, the cameras, Marcus, the car, the envelope in his hand. For the first time, he looked unsure. It was small, barely visible, but it was enough, because uncertainty had never been part of his approach before. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. The radio crackled again. "Units, confirm position. Remain where you are." Keller pressed the button. "Unit 12 holding," he said. His voice was steady, but not as steady as before. Not quite. He lowered the radio slowly, then looked at the envelope again, like it might answer something he hadn't asked yet. Across the street, the teenage boy zoomed in on his phone. "Yo," he whispered. "Something's happening." He didn't know what. None of them did. Not yet. But the air had changed. The silence felt different, heavier, expectant. Inside the cruiser, Marcus leaned back slightly, his hands still resting in his lap. Still calm, still composed. But now, no longer waiting in uncertainty, because whatever was coming, it had already started. The shift didn't arrive loudly. It didn't come with sirens or shouting or sudden movement. It came in the form of silence. A different kind of silence. The kind that makes people stop mid-sentence without knowing why. Keller felt it before he saw it. The weight of it pressing against his chest, tightening his grip around the envelope. He looked down the street again, slower this time, scanning past the watching neighbors, past the parked cars, past the stillness that had settled like dust. Then he heard it. Not close, not immediate, but approaching. Low at first, almost mistaken for traffic on a distant road. Then clearer. Engines, more than one. The teenage boy on the curb straightened suddenly, his phone still raised. "Yo," he whispered, barely audible. "What is that?" Heads turned, not toward Marcus, not toward Keller. Down the street, two black SUVs rolled into view, moving steadily, deliberately, like they had a destination already marked. No flashing lights, no sirens, just quiet authority. They didn't slow. Not until they reached the scene. Then they stopped. Right behind the patrol cars. Doors opened almost at the same time. 3 people stepped out. 2 men, 1 woman, all in dark suits. No rush, no hesitation, just purpose. The woman led. Mid-40s maybe. Hair pulled back, expression calm in a way that didn't need to prove anything. She walked straight toward Keller, her eyes already taking in everything. The broken window, the scattered glass, the envelope in his hand, the man sitting in the back of the cruiser. Keller didn't move at first, didn't speak, because something about this didn't fit. Not backup, not local, not anything he recognized. "Can I help you?" he asked finally, his voice steady, but thinner than before. The woman stopped a few feet in front of him, reached into her jacket, and pulled out a badge. She didn't flash it dramatically, didn't hold it high. She simply turned it enough for him to see. "Department of Justice," she said. The words landed heavier than the badge itself. Keller's eyes flicked down, then back up. His grip on the envelope tightened slightly. "We're handling a situation here," he said, instinct kicking in, trying to regain footing. "You'll need to—" "That situation," the woman cut in calmly, nodding toward the cruiser, "involves a protected individual." Keller blinked. Just once, like the words needed a second to settle. "I'm sorry," he said. The woman didn't raise her voice, didn't step closer, didn't change her tone at all. "That man," she said, her gaze shifting briefly to Marcus in the back seat. "Is not who you think he is." The air shifted, not gradually, instantly. Behind Keller, the other officers straightened slightly, their attention snapping into place. Lily felt it like a jolt. Her eyes moved quickly from the woman to Keller, to the cruiser, to Marcus. And suddenly, everything that hadn't made sense before started lining up. Not fully, but enough. Keller shook his head slightly, like clearing something away. "He's being detained for," he started. "For what?" the woman asked. The question wasn't loud, but it cut. Keller paused. For the first time since the stop began, he didn't have an immediate answer. He glanced down at the envelope, then back up. "Suspicious activity," he said. The words sounded smaller now, less certain. The woman nodded slowly. "Suspicious," she repeated. "Based on what?" Keller opened his mouth, closed it, because whatever answer he had didn't feel solid anymore. Behind him, Lily took another step forward. She wasn't trying to hide it now. Her eyes were locked on Marcus, on the keys in his lap, on that small metal piece she had noticed earlier. Her breath caught slightly, because now she could see it clearly. Not a keychain, not decorative, a badge, compact, discreet, but unmistakable. Her stomach dropped. Keller followed her gaze without meaning to. His eyes landed on Marcus's hands, on the keys, on the metal piece resting there, and for a second, just a second, everything stopped. Because recognition doesn't always come all at once. Sometimes it arrives in pieces, shape, color, detail, and then understanding. Keller's grip on the envelope loosened. Just slightly, his eyes flicked back to the woman in front of him, then to the cruiser, then back again. "What is this?" he asked, quieter now. The woman held his gaze. "This," she said, "is the part where everything changes." Behind her, one of the men stepped forward, already pulling something from his own jacket. Documents, official, structured, precise. "We're going to need that envelope," he said calmly. Keller didn't move, didn't hand it over. Not yet, because his mind was still catching up, still trying to reconcile the version of the situation he had created, with the one now standing in front of him. Inside the cruiser, Marcus sat exactly the same, calm, still, but now his presence filled the space differently, not contained, not controlled, just waiting. And for the first time since the beginning, Keller felt something he hadn't expected. Not anger, not authority, something colder, something heavier, something that settled deep in his chest and refused to move, because the moment had flipped, and he could feel it, even before he fully understood why. Across the street, the teenage boy lowered his phone slowly, his eyes wide. "Man," he whispered, "this just got real." No one disagreed. No one spoke. Because whatever this was, it was bigger than all of them. And it had only just begun. The street didn't feel like a street anymore. It felt like a stage where everyone had suddenly realized they were standing in the wrong scene. No one moved. Not Keller, not the officers behind him, not the neighbors who had been watching just minutes ago with quiet curiosity. Because now curiosity had turned into something else, something heavier, something closer to truth. The woman from the Department of Justice didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Open the door," she said, nodding toward the cruiser. For a second, Keller didn't respond. Not because he hadn't heard her, but because his mind was still catching up. still trying to find a version of events where he was in control. There wasn't one anymore. "Officer," she repeated, calm but firm. That word, officer, landed differently now. Not as authority, as responsibility. Keller moved, slowly, like each step had weight attached to it. He walked to the back of the cruiser, his hand hovering over the handle for just a second before pulling it open. The door clicked, then swung wide. Marcus stepped out on his own. No rush, no sudden movement. Just the same calm presence he had carried from the beginning. But now it filled the space differently. He wasn't being held anymore. Not really. The invisible lines had shifted. Everyone could feel it. The DOJ agent turned slightly toward him. "Mr. Reed," she said, her tone respectful, steady. "Are you all right?" Marcus gave a small nod. "I'm fine," he said. And it was true. Not because nothing had happened, but because he had expected it, prepared for it, lived through it before. The difference now was that it hadn't disappeared into silence. Keller stood a few feet away, the envelope still in his hand. His fingers tightened slightly around it, like letting go would mean admitting something he wasn't ready to face. "What is this?" he asked again. But the question had changed. It wasn't challenging anymore. It was searching. The second agent stepped forward. "This," he said, gesturing toward the envelope, "is federal material tied to an ongoing investigation." Keller's jaw tightened. "Investigation into what?" he asked. The answer didn't come from the agent. It came from Marcus. "Into patterns," he said quietly. The word hung there, simple but loaded. The DOJ agent turned slightly, giving Marcus the space to speak if he chose to. He did. "For the past 6 months," Marcus continued, "there's been a review of conduct in this district. Stops, detentions, use of language, use of force. Each word landed like a measured step, not rushed, not emotional, just factual." Keller shook his head slightly. "That's not," he started. "It is," the agent cut in calmly, "and you're part of it." Silence followed. Not the kind from before, not passive. This silence had weight. Because now, people understood. Not everything, not the full scope, but enough. Lily felt it hit her like a wave. Her eyes moved quickly, from Marcus to the envelope to Keller, and then back to Marcus. Everything clicked. The calm, the control, the waiting. He hadn't been trapped. He had been observing, and she had stood there. Watched it happen, said nothing. Her throat tightened. She started. But the words didn't come, because what was there to say? Across the street, the man in the baseball cap lowered his arms completely now. His voice came out low, almost to himself. "Man, they got him." But it wasn't Marcus he meant anymore. The DOJ agent extended her hand. "The envelope, officer." Keller didn't move at first. Then slowly, like his body was working against him, he handed it over. The moment his fingers released it, something shifted. Not visible, but real. Because that was the moment control left his hands completely. The agent opened the envelope briefly, scanning the top page, then closed it again. "That's all we need for now," she said. The second agent stepped closer to Keller. "Your report, your body cam, and your radio logs will all be reviewed," he said, effective immediately. Keller didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already happened. The words from earlier, his words, echoed back at him in a way they hadn't before. "You don't belong here." Now they didn't sound like authority. They sounded like evidence. Lily stepped forward suddenly. "I need to give a statement," she said. Her voice shook slightly, but she didn't stop. About the stop. About what was said. All eyes turned to her. Even Keller's. For a second, something flickered in his expression. Not anger, not disbelief. Something closer to realization. But it passed quickly, because it didn't matter anymore. The DOJ agent nodded. "We'll take that," she said. Lily swallowed, her hands steady now, because silence wasn't an option anymore. Not after this. Marcus watched her for a moment, then gave the smallest nod. Not approval, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. And that was enough. The agents turned back toward Keller. "This is going to move forward," one of them said. "Formally." Keller's shoulders dropped slightly. Not dramatically, just enough. Because for the first time since the stop began, he wasn't in control of what came next. Marcus stood quietly as everything unfolded. No anger, no celebration, just stillness. Because this moment wasn't about victory, it was about truth. And truth didn't need to shout. It just needed to be seen. And now, it was. The truth didn't explode. It didn't rush in like a storm or tear through the street with noise and chaos. It settled. Slow, heavy, unavoidable. The flashing lights from the patrol cars still painted the pavement red and blue, but they didn't feel the same anymore. What had looked like authority just minutes ago now looked smaller, quieter, like something that had been seen too clearly to ever return to what Etz's. Keller stood where he was, but the space around him had changed. The officers behind him weren't standing as close anymore. The crowd across the street, those who had watched, recorded, whispered, now looked at him differently. Not with curiosity, not with quiet agreement, with distance, with judgment. Because the story had shifted, and everyone felt it. The DOJ agents moved with calm precision, already speaking quietly into radios, already coordinating the next steps as if this had been in motion long before this morning. Because it had. Marcus stood a few feet away, no longer framed by the cruiser, no longer contained by anything except the moment itself. He didn't step forward, didn't claim space. He simply stood there. And somehow, that said more than anything else could have. Lily approached him slowly. Her steps were careful, not out of fear, but out of understanding that something had changed between them. "I should have said something," she said, her voice low, almost lost under the hum of the scene. Marcus looked at her, not with anger, not with disappointment, just with recognition. "You did," he said. Lily shook her head slightly. Too late. Marcus held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once. Late is still better than never." The words landed gently, but they stayed. Because they weren't just about this moment. They were about everything that led up to it. Everything that had been left unsaid. Everything that had finally been spoken. Lily exhaled, her shoulders lowering slightly, like she had been holding something up for too long. Behind them, one of the agents approached Marcus. "Mr. Reed," he said, "we'll need to take a formal statement later today, but for now, you're free to go." Marcus nodded. Understood. The agent hesitated for a second, then added, "And we'll handle the damage." Marcus glanced briefly at the shattered window. The glass, the leather, the quiet evidence of something that had gone too far. Then he looked back at the agent. "I'm not worried about the car," he said. And he meant it, because the car had never been the point. Across the street, the teenage boy lowered his phone completely now. For the first time since this started, he wasn't recording. He was just watching, trying to understand what he had just seen. The man in the baseball cap shook his head slowly. "Man," he muttered, "all that for nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It had never been nothing. Keller remained still, his eyes no longer on Marcus, no longer on the agents, but somewhere in between, like he was replaying something in his mind. Every word, every decision, every moment where he could have stopped and didn't. The weight of it settled on him now, not loud, not immediate, but steady, unavoidable, because some things didn't need to be shouted to be understood. They just needed to be seen clearly. And now they were. Marcus turned slightly, looking down the street. His street. The same houses, the same driveways, the same quiet life he had built piece by piece. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He took a step forward, then another. Not toward the agents, not toward the crowd, toward home. The broken glass crunched softly under his shoes as he passed the car. He didn't stop, didn't look back, because he didn't need to. Behind him the scene continued. Voices, radios, movement. But it felt distant now, like something already fading. As he walked up his driveway, the front door opened. Maya stood there, small and still, her backpack slipping off one shoulder. She had been watching from inside. He could see it in her eyes. The questions, the worry. Marcus softened instantly. The weight of everything else shifted. Not gone, but placed somewhere else. He knelt down in front of her, just like he did every morning, adjusted her backpack strap, smoothed the top of her hair. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Marcus smiled, a real one this time. "I'm okay," he said. She studied his face for a second, like she was checking for something deeper, then nodded, satisfied. He stood, taking her hand gently. Behind them the street was still watching, still processing, still learning. But Marcus didn't turn around, because he didn't need the moment to be seen anymore. It already had been, and that was enough. The sun sat higher now, brighter, warmer, the kind of light that didn't hide anything, the kind that showed things exactly as they were. And in that light, one truth remained clear. A man's worth isn't proven by what he drives, or where he stands, or who believes in him. It's revealed in how he holds himself when the world gets it wrong. Marcus never raised his voice, never fought back, never tried to prove anything. He simply stood in his truth. And when that truth was finally seen, it didn't just change the moment. It changed everything that came after. Because dignity doesn't need permission, and real power doesn't have to shout to be heard. It just waits until the world is forced to listen. Marcus Reed didn't shout, didn't fight back, didn't chase validation. He simply walked past shattered glass, knelt down, and fixed his daughter's backpack like nothing in the world could take that dignity from him. The truth is, the most dangerous thing about prejudice isn't the moment it shows up. It's how confident it feels when no one questions it. And sometimes, the hardest lesson isn't for the person being judged, it's for the one who thought they were right. So today, think about one moment, just one, where you might have made a quick judgment about someone like Marcus. What if you paused next time, just long enough to see the person before the story you've already written? Have you ever stood in a moment where something felt wrong, but nobody said anything? Or maybe you were the only one who did. Tell me below. I want to hear your story. And if this moment stayed with you, wait until you see what happens in the next one.